Okay, slide number 2. Now here we're talking about the ocean environment, and we have a lot of things we can talk about. So I've drawn a picture where, starting at this side, you can see we have the land, and then we have a very steep beach, a very short beach, and then the land sinks down to what we would refer to as the continental shelf. So around each of the continents, we have a relatively shallow section of the ocean, and then it goes and becomes very deep. So when we talk about this ocean, we can talk about different zones. We can talk about the zone where the ocean meets the shore, and that's going to be what we call the littoral zone. And this would be a beach, that kind of an environment where you have a lot of energy if you have a lot of water and room for winds to create waves. So you have this littoral zone, which is where the water meets the shore. And then when we talk about the water itself, we can say, well, we have the pelagic zone. That's where the life is swimming. So this is what we would refer to as the water column. So the pelagic zone is where we have swimming life. And then on the bottom, all along the bottom, this is what we would call the benthic community. Now, you might remember at the very beginning of the semester, I talked about how I had started my career as an oceanographer. And as an oceanographer, you specialize. I was a biological oceanographer, but I was even more specialized than that. I didn't study the life swimming in the water. I studied the life living on the bottom. So I was what you would call a benthic biologist. And so the crabs and worms and mussels and everything like that, the stuff that's crawling around on the bottom and in the sediments in the bottom, this is the benthic life. So you have pelagic life, fishes, that kind of thing, jellyfish, anything swimming around. And you have the benthic life, the stuff that's crawling around on the bottom. Now, when we talk about the deep ocean, it becomes very deep. We had said that we start out with the photic zone. We start out with the zone of about the top 20 meters, which is where we have photosynthesis. And then going down from below that, we have the mesopelagic. That means middle pelagic. And then we have the bathypelagic. You're getting deeper. You're below 1,000 meters at that point. We have the abyssal zone, and then we have the hadal zone. The hadal zone is the deepest parts of the ocean. And we'll talk about the deepest part of the ocean in a minute when we talk about work that has been done where we finally explored a place called Challenger Deep. And that is the deepest point in the ocean. It's in a region called the Marianas Trench. So we have this zonation of the ocean that is based on both just the meters of depth, the different kinds of life. So we had, the zones that we had talked about: epipelagic, mesopelagic, bathypelagic, abyssal, and hadal zones. We had said we have the photic zone. The photic zone, that's where photosynthesis occurs. We had said we have things living in the ocean, and then we have the benthic life. One other thing, when we look at the ocean, you notice I have the wind up here. I have the wind blowing across the ocean, and if you've been to the beach, you know that these waves come crashing into shore. They're produced by the wind, and water currents, wind and water currents. But wind, as it's blowing across the ocean, it mixes the top part of the ocean. And so we produce, and so if you mix this top part, you've got the sun shining down, warming the surface of the ocean, and that this warm water, warmed by the sun, is being mixed, but it's not mixed all the way to the bottom. It's only mixed down to a certain point. And the location in the water column where the mixing stops is called a thermocline. And so above the thermocline, we have warm, mixed water, and below the cold stratified water. We had said that water has a high heat capacity, and so unless you add heat, it requires a lot of heat to warm it up. And one of the things that physical oceanographers do is they will measure, and you'll measure water temperature by depth, and they'll drop a little probe down, and it'll go down, and as it's falling, it's like warm, 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 cold, and cold, and even colder, all the way down to below freezing at depth. One of the things, you've probably experienced this. If you've ever been swimming in a lake, so a lake, you'll be swimming at the top, and you say, I want to dive down deep. And as you go down deep, all of a sudden you hit really cold water. That's where you've gone through the thermocline.